Hi, this is going to be our body tissue lecture. Tissues are really a group of cells that are specialized in, or that are working together in a similar structure and function. They are very specialized, and we have basically four main types of tissue within our bodies. We have epithelial tissue, which main function is to cover and line organs, or the surface of organs or the surface of bodies. Connective tissue, which main function is being supportive. Nervous tissue, which is to control and also transmit messages. And the muscular system, the main responsibility is for movement. Now, when you look at this picture here, there are examples of each type of tissue. There are going to be many more areas where you're going to find these types of tissue, but this is just to give you a general idea of where these tissues can be found. Let's start with epithelial tissue. With the epithelial tissue, like I said, this is going to be lining body cavities and also covering organs and body surfaces. There are many different specialized functions or characteristics and functions that epithelial tissue will have. One, the cells are very closely packed together. This allows then for the next special characteristic of those specialized connections. Those connections are able to transmit messages and send signals to each other very easily. Then we also have two sides to our cells, or I should say two sides to the tissue. Here we have on the surface, we have the apical surface. This is going to be open to the cavity or exposed. And then the basal, or sometimes it's referred to as the basement surface, is the attached surface. So you can see that there's two areas that are very, very much important. One that's for attachment, one that's going to be exposed to the surface where it's going to be able to transmit fluids for protection, transmit other molecules as well. Then we also have connective tissue that is going to be supportive to these cells. And the connective tissue is also very important because these tissues do not have blood vessels within them. They are able to get their nutrients from that connective tissue. But these tissues do have nerves that will allow them to sense their environment. And another benefit to these cells or these tissues is that they have a high regeneration capacity. They're able to replace themselves. Epithelial tissue is given two names. The first name is really to show how many layers of cells that there are in the tissue. Simple means that there's simply one layer, and stratified means that there are many layers. The second name has to do with the shape. You have a couple examples here. Squamous cells are going to be, they're kind of like almost, they're flat, and sometimes they call them like scale-like. Cuboidal sounds like a cube, and that's what you can see here that it looks like. And then the columnar, because they look like columns. Now, if you are looking at these examples, these simple ones here, where there's only one layer, now these cells are really for filtration, diffusion, secretion, absorption. They're really allowing, it's a thin layer, so things can go through them quite easily. These stratified down here, stratified are used more for protection, and you can see that with these layers here, multiple layers, that they are able to protect, offer a protective function because they just are a little bit tougher. Now you may have noticed the pseudostratified. Pseudostratified and transitional are kind of some exceptions to the rule, but the pseudostratified is not truly stratified, but it appears to be stratified because one end of the cell is larger than the other, and so it gives the impression that it is stratified when in actuality it is not. Next we have connective tissue. Connective tissue, as you can see, has many different functions. It is the most durable of all tissues, and we're going to get into how the different functions work for each of the types of tissue within this group. This is a very diverse group. Some of the tissue has a lot of blood vessels in it. Some it's avascular, where there's no, meaning that there's no blood vessels in it. And so we're going to talk about those. There's a lot of non-living material, that extracellular matrix that separates the cells of the tissue, that also gives it the connective tissue's characteristic. There are structural elements that are pretty standard within connective tissue. You have ground tissue, which is basically fills the space between the cells and is where it contains the fibers. There's a lot of water that makes up this area, and also proteins that allow for binding to take place. Then you have the fibers. There are three main types of fibers. We have collagen fibers that allow for strength. They're really strong and allow for strength in the connective tissue and allow the tissue to be more dense. The elastic fibers that allow the tissue to stretch and then recoil. And then reticular fibers, which are fine fibers that allow that form a network. If you look at this diagram here, you can see here's connective tissue, and then we can start breaking this down into different groups. Now, it depends on which group you, which person you really talk to, or which book you look at, but they can divide these in different ways. But this is connective tissue proper, and then it can be broken down into two groups. And then you can also have different types of cartilage, bone, and blood. Those are your main groups of connective tissue. Now, on the last slide, I showed you that there were two types of connective tissue proper. There's loose and dense. Loose connective tissue is what it sounds like, is that the cells just aren't, and the fibers and cells just aren't as closely packed in there. And that can offer a lot of benefits. Like adipose tissue, for example, is a type of loose connective tissue, and it allows for a lot of storage of nutrients for protection and insulation. It also can allow more of those reticular fibers to get in there and make a nice framework for such things as like the lymph nodes and the spleen. Then you also have dense connective tissue, which is the other type of connective tissue proper. And this one is what it sounds like. It's very dense. They're closely packed bundles of different types of fibers. Like dense regular connective tissue is very important. That they have a lot of collagen fibers that are running in the same direction, that are making up our tendons and ligaments. There are other types of dense connective tissue as well. Like dense regular, I said, was the tendons and ligaments are all running in the same direction. Dense irregular is what it sounds like. It's not, the fibers are arranged in an irregular fashion. And this is a lot of times found in our dermis of our skin. Then we have cartilage, and there are three types of cartilage. Cartilage does not have nerve fibers and does not have blood vessels. What you think about, like your ear, it doesn't hurt to, to bend your ear in different directions. Now, of course, if you bend it far enough, it's going to start affecting the cells that do have nerve endings, and that's when it's going to hurt. But you have three different types of cartilage. You have hyaline cartilage, which is the most abundant and is very firm and is supportive. And you're going to find it has kind of a glassy and a rubbery. It has a glassy look to it. It's kind of rubbery. You find it a lot in joints and also in your larynx as well. We have elastic cartilage, where strength and stretchability are needed, and like that's going to be your ear, where there's strength, but there's also flexibility. So then we have fibrocartilage, which is also a very important cartilage because it has just an incredible ability to withstand heavy pressure. So in your vertebral column, you'll find the fibrocartilage, and that is very important for the compressibility of it. And then we have bone, which is another connective tissue, and obviously it's supportive of the body, and also protects a lot of the internal organs because of its hardness. And then we have blood, and blood is classified as connective tissue because it arises from the same tissue that other connective tissue does when we're in the embryonic stage. And really, you can't see the fibers unless the blood is clotting. So the nervous tissue, we're just going to talk about for a little bit because we're going to talk in more detail about this when we talk about the nervous system. The nervous tissue is really important because it's going to help regulate and control body function. It's constantly picking up stimulus to figure out if there's any changes in the environment and to respond to those changes. Neurons are the main cells that are doing the regulating and the controlling, But there are many supporting cells that we'll talk about in the nervous system that are very important to making sure those messages get transmitted. Muscle tissue is another one we're not going to talk a whole lot about right now. Um, there are three main types of muscle tissue. You have the skeletal tissue here. Skeletal tissue that are going to be important for movement. That's going to be, our main. This is going to be a voluntary muscle. So you think about all the things that you decide you're going to do. Those are your skeletal muscles that you're able to move. This is a voluntary type of muscle. This is our only type of voluntary type of muscle. You notice that there are stripes within these muscles. Those are called striations. That's going to be an important part of these muscles as well. These are going to be attached to connective tissue on many different levels. When we get into the muscle tissue, you'll see that very small muscle fibers are going to be wrapped in connective tissue, as well as the muscle bundle in general is going to be supported by connective tissue. We also have cardiac muscle here. Cardiac muscle is in your heart. It's only found in your heart. These also have striations, but they are involuntary. I mean, you don't think about pump, pump, pump. If your heart, it's something that automatically does it. Some of those striations and also there's some discs that are connecting the cells allow for transmission of signals to allow the heart to pump as one. And then we finally have our smooth muscle here that is also an involuntary muscle. Like cardiac muscle is involuntary, but it does not have striations. One thing that's kind of interesting about these is that they have pointy ends to them. So that's one thing that we'll definitely point out, that it is a smooth muscle cell versus the other types of muscle cells. A lot of times you're going to find smooth muscle in the digestive tract, again, because you're not thinking like, okay, I digested this food, I need to move it along in my intestine. It's something that's naturally happening. Also in blood, there's blood vessels as well, some blood vessels that have smooth muscle around them to help move the blood from one place to another. Lastly, tissue is going to need to repair itself. There are three main steps for tissue to go through the repair process. First, the inflammation is going to need to take place to prepare the body for the repair process. Then organization is going to restore the blood supply. And finally, we have regeneration that is going to repair the tissue permanently. You think about all the time you get cuts or you break a bone, you tear a muscle, that has to be repaired, and it takes time for our body to repair those. Now, as we age, epithelial tissue will thin, bone, nervous tissue, all of these, there are many different types of tissue that take longer to repair or are wasting away, that are not able to keep up their function like they did at one point. And that's how you see, as people age, you can see that in their bodies, and they're more like osteoporosis, they're more likely to break bones because the repair is a little bit harder to do, or it's just not, the function isn't as strong as it once was.